It's been a while since I did an episode about sports analytics, right? And you know it's a field I love, so let's do that. For this episode, I was happy to host Ehsan Bokhari, not only because he's a first-hour listener of the podcast and spreads the word about it whenever he can, thanks a lot, Ehsan, but mainly because he knows baseball analytics very well. Currently Senior Director of Strategic Decision-Making with the Houston Astros, he previously worked there as Senior Director of Player Evaluation and Director of R&D. And before that, he was Senior Director at the Los Angeles Dodgers from the 2015 to the 2018 season. Among other things, we talked about what his job looks like, how Bayesian the field is, which pushbacks he gets, and what the future of baseball analytics look like to him. Ehsan also has an interesting background. As you'll see, he's coming from both the psychology and mathematics departments, and indeed, he received a PhD in quantitative psychology and an MS in statistics at the University of Illinois in 2014. And maybe most importantly, he loves reading nonfiction and spending time with his almost 3-year-old son, who he read Bayesian Probability for Babies too, of course. This is Learning Bayesian Statistics, episode 49, recorded August 31st, 2021. Welcome to Learning Bayesian Statistics, a fortnightly podcast on Bayesian inference, the methods, the projects, and the people who make it possible. I'm your host, Alex Andorra. You can follow me on Twitter at Alex_Andorra, like the country, and reach a true Bayesian state of mind by visiting learnbayesstats.com. That's learnbayesstats.com. Do you want to support the podcast and unlock exclusive Bayesian swag at the same time? Then you can visit my Patreon page at patreon.com/learnbayesstats. Starting at €3, you can get various benefits like the private MBS Slack channel, early access to special episodes, selecting questions for episodes, or even coming on the show. You'll get more details at patreon.com/learnbayesstats. Thanks a lot, folks. I'm very grateful for any support you can bring me.
Let me show you how to be a good Bayesian. Change your predictions after taking information in. And if you're thinking I'll be less than amazing, let's adjust those expectations.
What's a Bayesian? Is someone who cares about evidence and doesn't jump to assumptions based on intuitions and prejudice. A Bayesian makes predictions on the best available info and adjusts the probability, cause every belief is provisional. And when I kick a flow, mostly I'm watching eyes widen, maybe cause my likeness lowers expectations of tight rhyming. How would I know unless I'm rhyming in front of a bunch of blind men dropping placebo-controlled science like I'm Richard Feynman?
Ehsan Bokhari, welcome to Learning Bayesian Statistics.
Great to be here.
Yeah, I'm always happy to welcome a long-time listener on the show. That's always fun. And also, I want to thank you for being such a long-time listener and also recommending the show to other people, including other guests like JJ Ruby, who was there for episode 47.
Yes, I tell all my nerdy Bayesian friends about it because they have to listen to it.
Yeah, that's great. Don't hesitate to also just tell it to all your friends. Maybe they will become nerd afterwards.
There you go.
No, that's great. And also big fan of sports in general. So I'm always great to talk about sports analytics and so on. I think you can guess that from some of the best guests. Episode 2 already with Chris Fonsbeck, who works for the Yankees. Episode 25 with Kevin Minkus, which was focused more on European football or soccer, as you guys call it. So yeah, really looking forward to diving into that. But first, as usual, let's start with your background. What's your story before sports analytics, Ehsan?
Yeah, I did my undergraduate degrees in math and psychology at the University of Arizona. I then did a PhD in quantitative psychology at the University of Illinois, and along the way got a master's in statistics. So after I finished school, I applied to a lot of different positions, and I ended up getting 3 different offers in 3 very different areas. So the first was an analyst role with a company called Sports Authority that is now bankrupt. So glad I did not take that one. The second one was a psychometrician role with the U.S. Department of Defense. And the third was a visiting assistant professor at the University of Illinois in the Department of Statistics. So had one industry, one government, one academia, which was pretty cool to be able to choose between those three. I ended up choosing the professor role at Illinois. I thought it'd be a good opportunity for me to really get my feet wet and discover what it'd be like to have an academic career. It wasn't something that I had set out to do when I entered my PhD, but I was open to that opportunity. I really loved teaching. So I spent that year in the Department of Statistics. I taught 3 courses there. I continued to work on publications and advised 3 undergraduate research projects, including one of, his name's Drew Jordan, and he now works for the Detroit Tigers. So that's pretty cool. So during that spring semester, that would have been my second semester, I came across this job with the Los Angeles Dodgers as for a senior analyst role. I had never really set out to work in baseball, but the idea intrigued me. And when I found the position, it just seemed perfect. And I applied. I got a call back about a week later. The director of research and development there had a PhD or has a PhD from operations research. His name's Doug Fearing. It just seemed like a really good opportunity. It was really research oriented. That's what was really important to me. And so once I applied to that and started interviewing, I got hooked. I put all my eggs in that basket. I really focused on trying to get that position. And unfortunately I did. I think the key to my story is that it's progressed in a very non-linear way. You go and look at my resume or LinkedIn profile. It just looks like this smooth, linear transition from school to working in sports and continuing within my career in baseball. But it's really been anything but. I mean, a lot of lucky bounces, as we might say in baseball. So it's been a fun adventure and ride in this career, but it has had a lot of ups and downs and gotten some lucky breaks to end up where I'm at. So that's been how I've gotten into baseball.
That's when I mean, lots of people, including me, just stumbled upon some opportunities that they didn't foresee. Like I think if you had asked me 5 years ago what I wanted to do, I would never have told you. I want to work full time on Bayesian Statistics in a startup and do open source. I think I didn't even know about that then. But yeah, you're right that while prepping for the show, for this episode, I had the impression that you going into baseball and sports analytics was something you had planned for a long time, and that was very linear because you ended up doing that almost right after your studies, right? That's a bit surprising to me that actually it happened almost by chance.
It really did. And had I not looked at that position at that period of time, it was only open for about 2 weeks. And, I easily could have missed that opportunity and probably not be working in baseball right now. So it's funny how life works.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm curious though, you were already interested in baseball or not? Do you define yourself as a baseball fan? Do you watch the games and so on? Or is it really something occupational in that you find yourself being good at what you're doing, but you're not really a fan of the game,
Well, I think it would be very hard to work in baseball if you did not enjoy the sport. And that's probably true for all sports, but baseball is a very long season, 162 games we play. And if you don't love the game, it's going to be hard to work in the industry. My love of baseball has existed for really as long as I can remember. I had a very, very short career playing. I played Little League for about 6 years, and that was about it because I couldn't hit. And so in undergraduate and graduate school, whenever I had opportunities, math courses or stat courses where you do a project, I tried to use baseball data when I could. And it was just something that I had interest in. I followed sabermetrics through Moneyball book and through Tom Tango's books and Bill James. So a lot of interest in the sabermetrics and that type of baseball research. And when I had opportunities, I'd do projects in school, and that really helped me land a position. A key to any type of job is having experience. If you're applying for a job and you have experience, that's usually going to set you apart from those who don't have experience. Of course, you can't get experience without having ever worked in a job before. So for me, the next best thing, and this is true for other candidates who apply and want to work in baseball, is that I had research and I had work that I could point to that I had done and shown that as examples of and demonstrated work of me thinking about baseball problems. And in fact, I mentioned Doug Faring, my supervisor at the Dodgers, and how I was really research oriented. He had me do a job talk when I applied there. So I presented some work that I had done in the work that I tried to get published and ended up not getting published, but it was in using baseball data. I presented that when I came to interview. It was very much like a academic job talk that you might give for an academic position. And if I didn't have that, that experience or that work to point to, it might not have gone as well for me. So it really helped out having that in my back pocket. So I think that's an important part for someone who wants to work in sports and doesn't have the opportunity to take an internship or do work while they're in school, is to do research projects on your own or with an advisor, like the student I had with Illinois, Drew Jordan, who did work with me on baseball data and went to graduate school at Duke and now is working for the Tigers. He could point to work that he had done. I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And that's also related to also the value of open source.
Yes.
I mean, having an open source portfolio is super valuable then if you're looking for any job in the data science world, I'd say.
Yes, exactly.
And so, yeah, you would define yourself as a baseball fan. Like, is it your favorite game, like, really? Or is there another game you really like too, or even more, like basketball or soccer?
Yeah.
I know it's not very frequent in the US, but that happens.
Growing up, I liked probably the four major US sports, which was football, hockey, basketball, baseball. But baseball was always my favorite. I did, there were periods of time where I was really into football, really into basketball. But since I have joined the baseball industry, I have not paid much attention to the other sports. And baseball is always number one for me, so it wasn't that hard to give up the other sports. It's just hard to follow other sports when you're so hyper-focused on the team and the sport that you're in. I guess I have a passive interest in what my other favorite teams are doing, but I don't really follow them, not like I used to.
Yeah, but you still enjoy like watching baseball and so on your free time. Like it's not reminding you of like you don't have a work PTSD each time you watch a baseball game during your holidays.
Well, I did work for the Dodgers in 2017 and then came to the Astros in 2019, and there was a little PTSD because the Dodgers lost to the Astros in the World Series. And when I interviewed with the Astros, I came to the stadium, which was the first time since 2017 World Series, and had some memories there that I wanted to forget, and unfortunately were brought back to life during my interview. But I've quickly moved past that. So for the most part, still turn on the games when non-Astros games when they're on TV. Still watch like college baseball. I'll take my son to watch Little League. He's about 3 years old. He'll be 3 in a couple of weeks. And if it's baseball, I'll watch it. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, okay. So that's great. And actually your PTSD went in the other direction than what I had anticipated.
Right.
It was sports going into work and not work going into sports.
Exactly.
So it's okay.
Exactly.
I definitely know the feeling though. Okay. I remember for the rest of my life the defeat of PSG in Barcelona.
Uh-huh.
I think it was 2017 too. Hard year for a sports fan in this episode.
Yes.
And PSG won 4-0 to Barcelona in Paris, and then second game they lost 6-1 in Barcelona. It was like an eventful game. I think I slept 2 or 3 hours this night. It was horrible. Yeah.
But sports tend to do that
revenge.
To us.
Yeah, exactly. We got our revenge though last year, so it's okay. Yeah. And so, do you have a favorite team or not? Like, it's hard or to choose a favorite, or do you have a team that your heart is beating for?
Sure, the team I'm working for will always be the favorite team. Now, growing up, I was a Cubs fan, Chicago Cubs fan. Uh-huh. But once I started with the Dodgers, the loyalties quickly switched. So it wasn't actually as difficult as I thought it would be. I remember the Cubs came into LA my first season there, and it was, completely rooting for the Dodgers. No inkling to root for the Cubs. Now, of course, the Cubs, for those who follow baseball, probably know that in 2016, my second year in baseball, they won the World Series, and that was a weird feeling because that was something I waited my whole life to see, and then they do it 2 years into my baseball career when I can't enjoy it. So go figure, right? It was also challenging to come to Houston, the team that beat the Dodgers in the World Series, but allegiances switch really quick when you're part of that culture, that organization. It's real easy to root for the team that you're working for.
Okay, that's interesting because my prior there was because I'm a PSG fan since I'm a child, mm-hmm. So I'm like, if I worked for PSG, mm-hmm. that would be great. I'd love that. But working for one of the enemies of the team, in France, it's more Marseille or teams like that. Although now PSG is dominating the championships so much that the real enemies are outside of France, like Barcelona, for instance. There is a great, it's starting to become one of the biggest football enemies of PSG. I would be like my prior would be, it would be very hard to work for Marseille or Barcelona. Mm-hmm. But it seems to be that it was your prior too, and that actually it wasn't your prior wasn't very accurate the data came in.
Yeah, that's spot on. Yep. My prior was exactly yours, and it ended up being pretty far from the truth. So the posterior has changed quite a bit.
Okay. I mean, that's super interesting. First, because you often hear for instance, Lionel Messi, just went from Barcelona to Paris this summer, and he was the iconic Barcelona player. And so when there are big changes like that, often you'll hear people questioning the loyalty of the new players. Yeah. So that's interesting to me because I'm thinking, then probably it's the same for the players. Maybe the first few games, it will be a bit weird for Messi to really feel like a Parisian player, but a few weeks or months in, and he'll really have a new loyalty to his new club. So that's something that's actually also surprising to me, because you often hear that, but then he will always be loyal to Barcelona before Paris, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And I'm actually wondering whether you can apply that. I don't know, maybe social scientists do that, but football, sports loyalties are huge. It's really you have people who have been raised in these loyalties for all their lives, and it's almost like partisanship in politics. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering if you want to fight partisanship, maybe a solution is to let people go into other environments, go to meetings from the other party.
Yeah.
Meeting people who are voting for this other party that you demonize, and witnessing that they are not as bad as you imagined, and then maybe that makes your partisanship a bit less strong, and in the end you're more able to see the situation from another perspective, which I think in a democracy is always something helpful. But I'm wondering if there aren't interesting things to pick up for a social scientist from the sports world.
You might be onto something. You might just be on your way to solving a lot of the world's problems right there with that type of thinking.
To say the least.
Yeah.
That I'm actually curious. If any listeners in the audience know of any papers or social experiments like that, let me know. That'd be something I'd be very interested in talking on the podcast. But for now, we have to talk about what you're doing, yes, and because time is flying by and I have so many questions for you. So maybe can you quickly define for listeners what you are doing nowadays? Like what is it like to do the work you're doing?
Sure. So I joined the Astros in 2019 as Director of Research and Development. Mm-hmm. And I only spent a year in that role before I moved to Senior Director of Player Evaluation and spent a year in that role. And now I'm in my current role, which is Senior Director of Strategic Decision Making. And really, I describe this as 4 areas that we focus. So it's long-term planning, education, innovation, and decision making. So importantly, those 4 are all interdependent. And I guess the best way to describe this is to illustrate it. So if we have a new technology that we're thinking of adapting or adopting, the technology, will arise in a number of ways, and it's largely driven by this innovation aspect of the department. And when we are looking into a new technology, we're basically at a decision-making point where we can adopt the new technology in some way, whether it's full adoption or partial adoption or something of that sort, or we move on, right? And how we make that decision, it has to be systematic, it has to be rational. And by rational, I mean that we're not only acting in ways that are empirically correct and favorable, but also acting in ways that are consistent with our previous processes to making decisions. And this is where I think, probabilistic models can help guide decision making. We have a lot of information that is just really full of uncertainty. It's often based off subjective opinions. So this is a way that we can systematically help decision making is by trying to model a lot of these decisions and use subjective opinions as best as possible. And another key part to this decision making is the planning. So I always love a good quote, and Dwight Eisenhower has a good one here that comes to mind. So plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. And really what he's getting at is that, whatever plans we lay forth, we're not necessarily supposed to stick to them, but the idea of planning and the practice and process of planning is how we are going to move forward with better decision making. So when we think of new technology that comes in, we want to think of how does this fit into our organizational vision? How does it disrupt any current departmental plans? What are the opportunity costs if we invest in the space? So if we can answer those questions, try and understand those questions and more, we feel like we're going to make the best decisions for the organization. And then finally, if we assume that we adopt this technology, the next steps are rolling out the technology, and that's mostly driven by the planning side, working with the different departments that are going to use the technology, and then further innovation on how that technology gets used above and beyond what it's designed to do. And then finally, the last part is just the education piece, where once we have this new technology, we need to educate the users on how it's used, what it can be used for, what information it's telling us, what information it's not telling us, as well as stakeholders outside of the area that it's being used, because there may be opportunities that we haven't thought about where this technology could really help them improve their own work. So I think this example illustrates the key aspects of the department and how it functions. It is very much focused on tomorrow and not today, which in many ways is fun for me. But in terms of like what's happening on the field today, I have less impact, less interest in that because my work is so much focused on 2023, 2024, and so forth.
Okay, so so your job seems to be much more focused on the long term than on the short term, right?
Yeah. And research and development is also very long-term focused. I mean, we're building models that are going to, make decisions over the long term, not necessarily in-game decisions. Not who's starting in today's lineup against this pitcher, but rather what type of player do we want to select, sign, draft for making our team better this year and future years.
Okay.
There is very much that distinction in research and development from some of the other analytical work that's being done on the baseball side.
Yeah, and I can clearly see an interaction here between the data-driven part, if you want, like especially on which players do we want to sign, which player do we want to not renew, or stuff like that. And also that probably interacts with which players, like the strategy, like the overall strategy that probably the board, I don't know how it's structured, but like maybe the board of the club has a strategy of, okay, our company, our brand, we want it to represent these values and not these other values. So maybe some players would fit the team from a physical standpoint, but maybe not from a strategical standpoint or value standpoint. And then you have to merge these two worlds, right? Kind of the data world and the domain knowledge world. So you see where I'm going with that, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, our models will tell us a lot about what we call true talent and how good we think that these players are and are going to be. There are factors that we can't or do not consider that do have an impact on the business side and what type of players that ownership wants to bring in. We have to work through. The best thing that we can do is just provide the information that we are able to capture and present the information as clearly and concisely as possible to help facilitate the best decision making. But ultimately, there will be other factors that come into play. I think as long as we're doing our job to put the best information out there, we are doing the right thing for the process.
Yeah, the competitive advantage that you are bringing on the table, whether on the pitch or off the pitch, is the quality of the models you guys are coming up with.
Exactly.
Okay. And then this is used for decision making.
Yes.
And so I'd love to work on these kind of models. That sounds super interesting, and definitely something that, for instance, in Europe, at least continental Europe, is underutilized in soccer. I mean, it's pretty impressive how many low-hanging fruits there are on the analytics side.
There's an orchard of low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
There are many opportunities. It's really actually one of the most exciting parts of the work is that there are just so many opportunities to improve decision making, to improve just the players. It's not necessarily low hanging. Sometimes you need a really big ladder to get to the fruit, but there are a lot of opportunities there, and that's what's exciting. That's the challenging part. Right?
Yeah. But management has to be willing to do that.
Yes, that is key.
Yeah, exactly. Right now in France, at least, it's not really like, I know data science is used for marketing purposes in the clubs, but not really yet on the player side, which is still influenced by mainly a lot of hand-waving stuff, and very subjective assessment, which have their value if they are done methodically, but can also clearly be improved and complemented by data-driven processes and models. So something I'm, of course, wondering, because all we're talking about here in my head makes me think that all this environment is is ripe for Bayesian statistics. So how useful are Bayesian stats here, and how Bayesian are sports analytics in general, if you want?
Well, first, I'd say not Bayesian enough, but there is plenty of use, and there are some people that do it in the public, in the baseball sphere. So Jonathan Judge is one person who has some work out there. And there is a professor at, I can't remember the university, but it's in Ohio. His name's Jim Albert. I think it's Bowling Green. And he is a Bayesian statistician. He does a lot of work in baseball. He's written some books in baseball and analytics. So publicly, there is work out there. I think that a lot of teams have seen the value of this probabilistic modeling and are embracing it. But my guess is that there's not enough embracing of it. So the bread and butter of baseball analytics is the projection models, and we're trying to forecast future performance under certain assumptions, and just the thought of projecting performance as a single expectation as opposed to a distribution. For me, that's just asinine. It makes zero sense to do it that way. Just with that, there's plenty of use for Bayesian methods and projection systems. And the general concept of uncertainty is really important in what we do. And we really do a disservice if we try and communicate these metrics without any sort of uncertainty. And it's even worse when we do it to like 3 or 4 decimal places. So I think this is such an important part of what we do from the analytics side to provide information to the end users is communicating uncertainty. And, the short-term effect of communicating uncertainty is that it just might cause a little bit of confusion. It might raise a little, an eyebrow or two. But the long-term effect of not communicating that uncertainty, that leads to complete lack of buy-in, low confidence. I mean, that's far, far worse, right? So for me, whether it comes from Bayesian methods or not, ideally it's through Bayesian methods, but the most important part is that we are communicating uncertainty and we're articulating what that implies.
Actually, I'm curious about who is most interested in what you're doing in your department, and also do you get some pushback from traditional stakeholders in this domain that had kind of the monopoly, what you guys now are doing? So I'm thinking about the scouts, the business side, and any other services that I ignore about. But yeah, I'm curious about all that.
Well, one of the, I think, most special things about the Astros is that we really do have buy-in from the bottom up. The players love the information. The scouts love the information. Our player development, our coaches, our coordinators, they love this information. That doesn't mean that they take it without any pushback. And sometimes there are thoughtful questions, but sometimes it can be less thoughtful, I guess. But really, the entire baseball operations at the Astros has an interest in data, and that's pretty remarkable. It's a huge advantage for us. I'd say that most of the pushback comes from misunderstanding, and that in turn is often due to poor communication on the people delivering the information. So that's why I think that, going back to the last point about uncertainty, just communication in general is just really important for the work that we're doing. I mean, if we're not communicating that well, if they're not understanding what the metrics mean, what they don't mean, then we're failing. I mean, it's a lot more for us to do. It's not just making models and putting out the numbers there, but being able to communicate and educate is really maybe the most important part of what we're doing.
But definitely having worked in big organizations that try to ramp up on the data side, having buy-in from the most important stakeholders is crucial. And and I don't mean buying by wanting yes men, but people who are interested in what that can bring, but are also thoughtful about the limits of what models bring to the table, which, I mean, we're the first to tell it here. Models have a lot of limitations, but compared to the baseline, just not using models has a lot of limitations too. So the question is whether the new limitations are better or not than the previous ones.
Right, and it is just so important to understand what they are. That's the thing. Without using models, we just assume that there are no limitations, and then we can make decisions unequivocally, and that obviously, as you know very well, that's just not true. And again, like the short-term effects of describing limitations, it can cause a little bit of confusion. It could maybe even create some doubt. But in the long term, that transparency is just so much more important because it builds the trust between the stakeholders and us on the analytics side.
Yeah, and it's also the way to learn and improve.
Exactly.
Because when you have the model and you are a bit harsh on it because each time it fails, you try to improve it. Well,
exactly.
At least you improve it. Whereas, we have this tendency as human to be harsher when machines fail than when human fail.
Right.
And it's like self-driving cars. Like each time they have an accident, like everybody is like, "Oh, see how dangerous that is."
Right.
Look at the number of people having accidents while not driving a self-driving car. It's incredible. And so, yeah, we definitely have that bias, but I mean, then you can use that bias in your advantage, like getting some feedback and criticism that is useful for your model, helps you to improve it. And at least now you have something that you can track. Whereas before, if you're just relying on human judgment that whose performance is not really assessed, then you don't really know what you do because you never really took stock of what you did before.
Right.
Yeah. And actually, that's something I'm super interested in, and I listened to another podcast, of course, because I listen to about billions of podcasts. This one is called Choiceology by Kathy Milkman.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And there was an episode about like this bias, like, I don't remember how it's called, but how humans tend to be harsher on machines than on humans when they fail. And so one of the solutions to harness the power of algorithms for decision making, because algorithms tend to be on average much better than us to make decisions, but also to get buy-in from humans, is to at least give the illusion of control to humans who are not doing, like, making the models, and it's like, I think the example was, or I think it was even an experiment, like you give a placebo button in the self-driving car to people where they are supposed to, like, be able to control the car with this button. Like, they can make the car brake if they push on that button, slow down if you want. You can slow down the car with this button, and I think it's a placebo button. But just doing that and giving the illusion of control makes people more trustful of the choices of the algorithm, because they think that they have control. Or if you can't do a placebo, you can give control over a part of the model that's not the core of the performance of the model, and maybe it will make the model a bit less efficient, but you will get more buy-in from the people who are not involved in the data stuff and don't really understand how that works. And for them, that's esoteric and that's magic. And so that helps you, in the end, improve the decisions, because you can still use a model, whereas before you couldn't.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. I mean, I think allowing the stakeholders to have input and being able to, if you think from the Scouts' perspective, like, the Scouts are providing data, and that information is extremely useful. So, explaining that to them and communicating that to them, that's going to go such a long way in the buy-in of the model, because they know that they have an impact in how the model decides which player is good and which players aren't.
Yeah. And that's where the Bayesian framework is super valuable, right? Because then you can include the priors that you get from the Scouts into the model, which is amazing. Also, I'm guessing that some Scouts are better than others. You may have like super forecasters in the Scouts.
Yes.
So that's also important to take stock of. That's fascinating. I understand why you love doing that.
Let me show you how to be a good Bayesian.
Hello, my dear Bayesian folks. I'm happy to tell you that today's episode is brought to you by another podcast, namely the Trending Tech podcast. Yes, that is a podcastception. Lately, they have covered starlings that help create high-speed networks and horses that can train executives to be better leaders. They have seen what augmented reality looks like through next-gen contact lenses, and how artificial intelligence is changing healthcare, your shopping experience, and even Audi cars. So if you're looking for a new podcast to listen to, and if you've ever wondered how technology is changing all of our lives, then check out the Trending Tech podcast at trendingtech.io. It's critical, but not all serious. So now I'm curious about how you communicate your results to the different populations in a club. Like, maybe sometimes you even have to communicate that to the coach or to the players. And I'm guessing you don't do that the same way as you do with the business team or the marketing team or the Scouts or even your own team. So how does that go?
Yeah, I think you probably have gathered that I think communication is just a really important part of the job. And really, I think the first and best thing to do is to establish the lines of communication. So create a relationship with the Scouts, work to understand the language that they use to communicate their results, just begin by getting to know them as people. I think that can go a long way. So what are their interests outside of baseball? Do they have spouse, kids? How did they get to where they are in their career? Where do they want to go in their career? And then you start to focus on the work. Like, what do you look for when you're evaluating a player? What tools could help you evaluate these players better? Now you're starting to get into where R&D and the analytic work can help them improve their jobs. And once you've established that, now we're talking on the same terms, right? We're working toward the same goals. So building that line of communication, that trust, that goes a long way. And communicating the results and tailoring it to what you've learned about their needs, the individuals, the department, and the department as a whole, that's just secondary, right? That comes naturally from those previous discussions. So in particular, I think scouts are really quite adept at understanding uncertainty and outcomes. I mean, they're working with players, scouting players that are in high school and college, and they understand that there are a lot of different ways that a player's career can unfold. So they, to a point, understand that a distribution of outcomes is something that is expected, and that's how they think. And what we can do is, instead of like providing, for instance, a continuous posterior distribution of these outcomes of the player, we might instead chunk it into these discrete values that the scouts better understand. So this is kind of to what the point of having them have some skin in the game. Scouts love the scale that they call the 20/80 scale. That's their lingo. And any statistician can understand it, because in theory, all it is a normal distribution, mean 50, standard deviation 10, but they use it discretely. So 20, 30, 40, sometimes they'll use the fives, but it's discrete. So if you can break up that posterior distribution into these different grades, probability of being a 20, probability of being a 30, probability of being a 40, etc. Now all of a sudden you're speaking their language with the language that we have, right? And it really connects very well with them. They understand exactly what we're saying to them. They know it. It clicks instantly with them. So, the way that you figure that out is by first establishing a relationship with the people that you're working with, getting to know them, and then it really just kind of comes naturally. That to me is where I found the most success. And again, that's how you tailor it to the different groups of people.
Yeah. And basically help them understand how this is a new tool that can help them and improve, instead of something that's there to replace them.
Exactly. Right.
And also to just give them orders or stuff like that.
Right. We're not doing this to tell them how to do their job or even to do their job. We're doing it to help them improve at their own work and improve the decision-making for the organization.
Yeah. And I think you couldn't even do that if you wanted to, right? You couldn't come up with a model where you would be super sure about, oh yeah, you should do that. You're really a dumbass to not have done that before.
Right.
It's like, welcome to the real stats world.
Exactly.
It's super interesting.
And that communication, helps them improve at their own jobs. Like they're going to learn from the models and improve at their own evaluation. So everyone wins, right?
Yeah, and also I think with time, it's going to be more and more in the custom, to have the data team part of the football team, basically, or the baseball team, or else. Yep. I was saying that analytics is not very widely used from a macro level in the institutions of football clubs, for instance, in continental Europe, but they are more and more used at the micro level. Like you have a lot of players who have their personal trainers, and they are super interested in the data that they can gather on the field while they are playing a game. They are connected everywhere and so on. And so, I think it's just a matter of time when this micro level analytics is going to go to the institution level. So just takes a bit more time depending on the society you are in. The US society compared to the French society is usually more data driven and data prone. So I'm not surprised by that.
Yeah, and one thing that I think this is already pretty well known, but the pandemic really highlighted just the need for understanding, quantitative information, just for the general person, right? Like it's not just a niche thing anymore. Like you really have to understand what these numbers and what the models are telling you. You don't have to understand the models themselves, but you have to understand what this output is telling us, because it is a life and death situation. Literally how you interpret that information.
Well, at least if your goal is to understand whether what you believe is true or not. That's an assumption.
That's an important one.
But definitely, and fascinating topics that we are actually going to talk about with Sir David Spiegelhalter that we'll be interviewing in a few days. Very looking forward to that.
Yes.
He did a lot of stuff about COVID and misinformation around that. So fascinating conversation coming soon. And actually, for you, when you communicate these results, are there some concepts, some specific concepts that are particularly difficult to impart to the different stakeholders, or how is this going?
I think maybe we often have a trade-off with interpretability and accuracy, right? I mean, oftentimes more accurate out-of-sample predictions are going to come from models that are going to be less interpretable. So there is a trade-off with that. But if there are always ways that you can do it post hoc and try and show how manipulating this one parameter changes the end results. So being able to provide tools like that can go a long way, so that whoever's using it, whether it be the coaches or the scouts, can play around with these tools that we provide them to get a better understanding of, okay, well, for instance, if this player increases his velocity by 1 mile per hour, what does that look like for his, what we call pitch grades, like how good his pitches are? And so building those tools can really help, even if the model itself isn't directly interpretable. Those type of tools can make it interpretable to some extent. But I think one of the more difficult things to explain are interactions. It can be really challenging to explain that to coaches and to scouts.
But that's definitely confusing. I mean, even for statisticians, interactions are hard. So.
I'd say that's probably the most challenging one. And the tools that you can build don't necessarily help all that much with that problem. There are plenty of interactions that intuitively make sense, but when you get into the more complex of three-order interactions, I mean, it can get really quite challenging to explain those.
So far that's not surprising that these kind of topics are demanding more explanation. They are not trivial topics, but they are important.
And we have our coaching staff, our scouts, they are inquisitive. They want to know. They're not asking because they want to challenge. They're asking because they are genuinely curious. So
curious,
which is an excellent quality to have.
That's the best interactions I have too. Like at PyMC Labs, when our clients are super curious like that, it's super interesting because they are super enthusiastic about learning all the time, and when they get things wrong, they don't get either disappointed or angry at you. They actually take that as something positive because they learned something. And when we get something wrong, they don't get angry either, because they know it's hard. So that's often the best environment to work in and to grow actually out of all that.
Yeah, completely agree. We feed off each other.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe do you have the favorite model or experiment that you worked on this topic that you can share with us?
Sure. So I can't go into all the details, but in general, hierarchical models are just really great because they allow us to do something that is really important in the baseball world, and that is easily model individual differences. And that has a lot of power for us. We're talking about, we've already talked about projecting players. And if we just assume all players, for instance, age the same, that's a rather hefty assumption. So hierarchical models allow us to tease out some of the individual differences much more easily. And that can be really powerful. Also, additionally, I think it really does do a good job of handling data that are systematically missing. And what I mean by that is you have populations of players that we have no data of this type on. Where, for instance, like our own players, we have a lot more data on than players that are playing for other teams. So that can be a real challenge on the modeling side. and hierarchical models have really helped with trying to solve that problem.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely share that. Hierarchical models, incredible.
Yes.
But yeah, that's really great.
It's high on the hierarchy.
Yeah. Good one. But I mean, I always love working on hierarchical models. I use that a lot for electoral forecasting. And so that's always really awesome. Another method I love are Gaussian processes. Mm-hmm. They are super hard to understand. They are wild beasts. So that's also why they are powerful and interesting. So I always love using those.
Yeah. And we've used those on numerous occasions, and they can be quite powerful. So also a good tool to have in that tool belt.
Yeah, exactly. And talking about that, actually, like quite quickly, but I didn't ask you when you were introduced to Bayesian stats, why they were attractive to you, and what's your favorite package or programming language when you work on a Bayesian model?
Yeah, so let me just preface, maybe kind of an awkward time to do it, an hour in, but I'm not a Bayesian statistician, but I would consider myself a Bayesian enthusiast. I can't recall the first time I came across Bayesian methods, but I would have to guess it was in graduate school. I mean, my undergraduate coursework, if I recall correctly, had 5 stat-adjacent courses, so not a lot. 3 of those were in psychology, and 2 in the math department. So it wasn't, at the time, Arizona didn't have a statistics department, but my focus in the math side was probability and statistics. So that's where those 2 came from. So certainly came across Bayes' theorem at some point as an undergraduate, but not Bayesian methods. But, this is kind of somewhat of a detour here. But, when I was a kid, ever since I was a kid, just very curious about how, we as humans categorize things. And, it's always so like crisp categorization, right? Like something belongs in this category. It always seems to be, not always, but oftentimes seems to be subjective. And just as an example, in baseball, there's a concept of an error. So a player makes an error that is determined subjectively by an official score. There's no crisp definition of what that means. It can be very arbitrary. But once it's classified as such, it has these rather large implications. There's this whole field in cognitive psychology that is focused on how humans classify things, and it's very interesting. We even have a PhD from cognitive psychology who studied this exact thing. So I'm not formally trained in it, just kind of enamored by this idea. And I bring it up because when I was at Arizona, I worked with this really brilliant human being and methodologist. His name was Lee Sechrist. He taught me so much, but he used to hold these weekly groups that he called EGAD. It stood for Evaluation Group of Analysis of Data. And in this group, we talk about papers. And one of the papers that came across was on something called fuzzy set theory. And I think the paper was in the medical diagnostic arena. I don't really know, but what really caught my attention was just the idea of fuzzy set theory. It was probabilistic membership as opposed to this hard, crisp membership into sets. I got a little bit obsessed with that idea. And, this stuff has been around for a while, so it wasn't anything new. There wasn't a lot of application to it. And so because I started really looking into this, it really just helped me embrace Bayesian ideas and thinking probabilistically. But by this point, I was into my graduate school career. The psychology department and the stat department at Illinois didn't have a Bayesian. So I was kind of left to fend for myself, if you will. My advisor at the time was someone who your previous guest, Frank Harold, would describe as a likelihoodist. So the research that we were doing was in an area of tensor decomposition. So his focus was parallel factor analysis. That's what his advisor had really created. And I think they're called CP models nowadays, but it's really just tensor decomposition. So our dissertation topic was supposed to be on fuzzy parafact modeling. And that was creating simultaneously optimizing pair effect model within fuzzy clusters. And that's similar to this other method that does something basically the same thing, but with regression. So we call it fuzzy C-lines. But unfortunately, my advisor was non-tenured in my third year, and I had to go a completely different route. And while I did not use any Bayesian methods in my dissertation, it was really focused on diagnostic measures. And when you're looking at diagnostic measures, you are working with 2x2 contingency tables, and those set themselves up nicely for Bayes' theorem. So that did play a role to a small degree, but in really simple ways. And then as I got into my career, that's when I started actually embracing and using the methods themselves. It's all self-taught, but I haven't done a ton. But I did. My language of choice would be R and Stan. And I did, I have fit a few Bayesian models when I was with LA and a couple here in Houston, but my experience is certainly quite limited. So what I bring to the table on the Bayesian side is the embracing of it and pushing for us as an organization to adopt these methods and bring in people who are a lot smarter and a lot more capable of handling this type of data with these type of methods to help us make decisions. So that was a long-winded answer to say that I'm not a Bayesian statistician per se, but my love for probabilistic thinking is really the motivation to push for these type of methods and how we make decisions.
Yeah, I love that. And you seem to like also the intellectual, like the philosophical characteristics of Bayesian statistics, like the way it helps you reason about the world that you're seeing and how to make sense of it and understand whether what you believe is true or not.
Exactly. And it's so often on a continuum, the black and white thinking just doesn't really cut it. And that's really when I came across this idea of fuzzy set theory, just, here it is. This is what I've been waiting for all my life, this way of classification that doesn't involve strict adherence to one group or another, right? It is probabilistic.
Definitely super interesting. So I want to, before we close up the show, I still have a few questions for you. So let's continue to dig in. And I'm curious about what do you think? And actually, I have two questions that are related. Like the first one is, what do you think are the main challenges of the field of sports analytics or baseball analytics? And also, then this is related, what does the future of baseball analytics look like to you? Like, which advances are you particularly exciting to you?
Yeah, so the biggest challenge, I think, is just growth. I mentioned just the desire to get more Bayesian statisticians working with us, people who are adept with those skills. And it can be challenging because we're not only looking for people who are very talented and skilled in statistics or data science, but we're also wanting people to have a solid understanding of baseball and a passion for baseball. So that is a pairing that can be challenging to find. And we are not just competing with the other 29 teams. We're competing with trillion-dollar companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple. I mean, that is unprecedented for baseball to have to compete with those companies. So it can be really challenging. So that, to me, that's the biggest challenge we face for the analytics, is just continuing to bring in talent and keeping that talent. So that is not a trivial task to solve, but we're working on it. And then the second part, so you asked the future of baseball analytics, right?
Yeah. What's exciting to you?
Yeah. For me, it's the biomechanical space. So this is the human movement data that is now quite prevalent in baseball. And so really having a better understanding of the kinetic sequence and pitching and hitting. And the kinetic sequence refers to the motion of the body. We're really starting with the legs and generating force that is used to, throw a pitch 100 miles per hour or square up a baseball at 110 miles per hour. So that requires a lot of force, and it is unsurprisingly very complex how that force is generated. So this is something that we are starting to build an understanding of with the type of data that we're now getting, but there's a long ways to go. But this is the next revolution in baseball, in my opinion, where pitch tracking was really the first one. Yeah.
Okay, so that's super interesting.
It really is.
And that relies on images and like pattern recognitions, stuff like that?
Yeah, so there are companies that produce these, so it's not necessarily being done in-house. But computer vision, deep learning models are often what they cite that they use. How much of that is accurate, I don't know, but it's based off markerless capture technology, not motionless. Markerless capture technology, so through cameras capturing the human movement of pitchers and hitters, which is a lot easier to do because they are standing in the same spot. It's a lot harder, for instance, to capture the movement of the runner and with a high frame rate camera. But this is a technology that's been around for a few years, and when I first started in baseball, it had just begun to become a thing and is now really blown up. But it's still a long ways to go before teams really have a grasp of this.
Okay, yeah, can guess that, but active area of research, to say. Yeah. Okay.
It involves a large number of data. I mean, we're talking about high frame rate data and hundreds of thousands of pitches a year that are captured. So it requires someone with very solid technical skills on the data side, but also knowledge of biomechanics. Again, a hard person to find.
Yeah. Not easy. Okay, then before we close up the show, maybe you talked about that at the beginning of the show, but yeah, maybe quickly. Let's say I'm a beginner in statistics and I would like to emulate the work you do. Mm-hmm. So which skills should I develop and which mistakes should I avoid or should I make even to learn best?
I like this question. I guess I think of it as what advice I would give myself when I was in school. And I would, of course, tell myself to invest in Bayesian statistics, but I'd also tell myself to invest some of my education in computer science. That's the first part. And then the second part would be to ask more questions. So on the first one, I realized pretty late in my educational career just how valuable Bayesian statistics are and will continue to be. And, if I had realized that earlier, I would have spent a lot more time trying to understand those models in, my quote unquote free time that I had as a graduate student. On the computer science side, it would have just, whether it's through requirements or just the courses you take, there are a lot of courses that just haven't had a lot of impact on my career that if I could do it over again, I would replace those with courses in computer science just because of how valuable a lot of those skills are. And I kind of realized that, but it's hard to add coursework when you're already taking so much that's required. And there really wasn't an option to replace those courses with required work. So, had I really decided to push that idea, it would have probably involved staying an extra year in graduate school. So whether or not I made the right decision, who knows? But that's something that I would have definitely thought twice about if I could do it over again. And then on the asking questions part, I think you could think of this as either a mistake that you should avoid or a mistake that you should make. Mistake to avoid is not asking questions. The mistake to make, if you want to phrase it this way, is to ask questions. Now, it's not, I wouldn't consider it a mistake necessarily, but I think being able and being comfortable to really put yourself out there and risk, the feelings of really stupidity, I guess, even though it's probably mostly in your head. That can be challenging, and certainly the fear is legit, but really whatever fear you get or whatever insecurity in the short term is going to not come close to outweighing the benefit in the long term of continuing to ask questions, being inquisitive and curious about things, to me, that is one of the most important things that someone can do when they have those opportunities. So put yourself around people that are going to be open to people asking questions, be open, including questions that might challenge what they're doing, right? Now, that's easier said than done, but if you can surround yourself with people like that, you're going to be in good shape. But, I continue to try and ask questions as much as possible. It's still to this day can be uncomfortable to do, but it's really a very important thing. And again, I think it's a mistake to not ask those questions.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more.
It's a missed learning opportunity.
Yeah, really couldn't agree more. And it's been also my experience personally. And since I've had the chance to stumble upon the PyMC community, and since then I have been able to ask a lot of apparently silly questions and surround myself with people who are better than me in some dimensions where I want to improve. And so that's just amazing when you can do that, because you learn so much more, so much faster. Also, like, you feed off each other, because like when you see people being able to receive questions that go counter to what they are supposed to think or say, and not getting angry, but actually thinking about it and like not taking it personally, basically, and not identifying with the criticism or the question, then you end up doing the same. And that's just, as we said before, one of the best environments to grow.
Completely agree, right? That type of culture is really something that just doesn't happen by accident. It's really important, though.
Yeah. There is a selection effect in which people you take in or not in the team. Okay, well, awesome. Ehsan, that was great having you on. Of course, before letting you go, you know that I'm going to ask you the two questions I ask every guest at the end of the show. So first one, if you had unlimited time and resources, which problem would you try to solve?
I know that the most common answer is climate change, and I don't know how one doesn't pick climate change, given the impact that it has on our future. Unfortunately, we don't have unlimited time to solve this problem. If I had unlimited resources, I think it would probably be poorly spent with me working on helping the climate change crisis. I'm not really sure what I could add to that. So I'd probably give that money to someone who could. But realistically, I guess with unlimited time and resources for me, I would want to focus on sport injuries. How do we best predict and prevent injuries in sports? And I guess specific to my sport, baseball, the biggest injury that we see is in the ulnar collateral ligament, which is a ligament that connects the elbow joint. It's in the elbow joint, and it's primarily an injury in pitchers. And when this injury occurs, which is usually a tear of that ligament, it requires surgery that is called Tommy John surgery, and that can leave a player out of the game for 12 to 18 months for rest and rehab. And that's in terms of cost to the organization, that's a huge cost. So being able to solve that, not solve it, but be able to better predict and better prevent is just a huge part of what we're trying to do. And we got a long ways to go here, and pointing to the markerless data that we're getting on the biomechanics space, that's what's going to help try and figure this problem out. But that would be it. That's a really challenging problem and a really important one in baseball.
Yeah, I can guess. Really love how passionate you are about what you're doing. Second question. If you could have dinner with any great scientific mind, dead, alive, or fictional, who would it be?
I would go with Paul Meehl. So Paul Meehl he was very inspirational in some of the work that I ended up doing with my dissertation. He's a clinical psychologist, was a clinical psychologist. He ruffled a lot of feathers with some of his work. In the 1950s, he had this little book that showed that statistical methods outperformed prediction from clinical expertise. And, you can imagine the impact that had at the time, coming from a clinical psychologist. And of course, it's led to a plethora of research in this area. And really, arguably, I think you could say, foreshadowed the big data craze in the early 2000s. So I think he's had a huge impact philosophy, on science in general, but in particular in psychology. He also, a lot of his writing was just really incredible, really witty. He's a very smart person. I think he'd be just really interesting person to talk to at dinner and have dinner with. And I imagine that the stories that he would tell would be incredible. The wisdom and insight that he would share would be invaluable. And in particular, what I would want to ask him about is his thoughts on the replication crisis in psychology and how that's unfolded. Because a lot of the work that he did, some of his colleagues that Jacob Cohen did in the 1950s and 60s and 70s really warned about these questionable research practices in psychology. And to the point that I don't think that he would be very surprised about the failure to replicate a lot of these studies in psychology. So I'd be very curious to hear his thoughts on that. And I think that in general, he'd just be a very nice person to have a meal with.
And so you were saying that he wrote some books or stuff like that we can maybe put in the show notes?
Yeah, sure. So I think his most famous book was published in 1954, and that was Statistical versus Clinical Prediction. And I can send a few other papers, some of them co-authored by him, that are on this topic as well.
Definitely. Let's if you can put that in the show notes, that'd be great, I think. Awesome. Thanks a lot, Ehsan. Again, I wasn't disappointed. An episode about sports analytics is always something I enjoy. And the topic is so large and broad and so many interesting avenues of research for statisticians, as you said, that I could do a lot of them. As usual, I'll put resources and a link to your website in the show notes for those who want to dig deeper. Thank you again, Ehsan, for taking the time and being on this show.
Thank you, Alex.
You bet. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
This has been another episode of Learning Bayesian Statistics. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show on your favorite podcatcher or on Podchaser, and visit learnbayesstats.com for more resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes that will help you reach true Bayesian state of mind. That's learnbayesstats.com. Our theme music is Good Bayesian by Baba Brinkman, with MC Lars and Megaran. Check out his awesome work at bababrinkman.com. I'm your host, Alex Andorra. You can follow me on Twitter at Alex_Andorra, like the country. You can support the show and unlock exclusive benefits by visiting patreon.com/learnbayesstats. Thanks so much for listening and for your support. You're truly a
good Bayesian. Change your predictions after taking information in. And if you're thinking I'll be less than amazing, let's adjust those expectations. Let me show you how to be a good Bayesian. Change calculations after taking fresh data in. Those predictions that your brain is making, let's get them on a solid foundation.